Welcome everybody today, and thank you for joining this webinar. My name is Joris van der Vis, and I'm an SAP Security Specialist and one of the co-founders of Protect4S. I'll be your host for today. First of all, I want to thank you for the great interest with the participants from over 30 different countries in Europe, the Middle East, Asia, Australia, and New Zealand. With so many people, we muted all of you during this webinar, but in case there are questions, please feel free to put them in the specific Q&A area that you can find in this client. We have reserved some time at the end to answer them all. In case there is too many questions, we'll make sure that they will get addressed anyway after this webinar. This session will be recorded and we'll share it with you afterwards, along with the slide deck, of course. As a short introduction about myself, I've been working in the SAP field for 20 years in different roles, from an ABAP developer to SAP basis consultant, and I specialized in SAP security around 15 years ago. That was at a big SAP implementation for the Dutch Ministry of Defense. I worked there via Capgemini, and especially back then, the topic of SAP security was not yet that common. I like doing SAP security research also. I found several vulnerabilities in SAP software. Besides making the best SAP security software, we love to share our knowledge by presenting, for example, on SAP security conferences or on our blog page. You can find articles and white papers there, such as a recently performed internet-wide scan we did for online SAP systems. In this next hour, I will tell you more about our vision on SAP Security Automation and also show you how to do that. At many SAP companies, we still see limited SAP security maturity with relatively many manual processes still, and customers are often unaware that there is an affordable solution for that largely automates and simplifies SAP security with the tooling that we offer. So something about Protect4S. Over the past years, we have translated our collective SAP security knowledge and experience into the Protect4S software so that SAP companies can continuously secure their SAP systems themselves. And that's quite important. Our focus is SAP platform security, especially to automate and simplify the processes there related to vulnerability management. And we are extending that all the time. The company was founded in the Netherlands, but it has grown rapidly in Europe since our first customer in 2016. And since last year, we have also expanded globally. And we do this with our own team from the Netherlands, South Africa, and Singapore. And of course, in collaboration with regional reselling partners. Our resellers are mostly SAP consultancy companies or managed service providers. And we are quite proud that big names such as the Rabobank, Oracle, and Amadeus, but also Deloitte, for example, continuously protect their SAP systems with Protect4S. In addition, we have performed hundreds of SAP security assessments for SAP customers. The software is a SAP certified add-on, and we work closely with SAP Waldorf. For example, when it comes to reporting SAP security vulnerabilities that we discover via our own research. To date, we have already identified and reported more than 80 vulnerabilities in SAP software. If you want to stay informed about SAP security news and knowledge, just follow our company page on LinkedIn. So something about the agenda for today. Well, today's topic is SAP Security Automation. We believe that this is a relevant and quite on topic area, as we see many SAP customers still struggle as they are, for example, having difficulties overseeing the vastness of SAP deployments that they have within their premises. Also, the amount of efforts to do SAP security properly is ever increasing, with new functionalities being shipped by SAP. And as more recently, SAP companies have also been opening up their SAP systems to the internet due to the growth of web and mobile applications, for example. That's why we also see an increase in risk there coming from the internet. And especially with the Fiori scenarios, people will more and more open up their SAP systems to the internet. Before we start, it's good to emphasize SAP security is a really wide discipline, and we can definitely not cover everything in this 1-hour webinar. Focus here will therefore primarily be on what we call SAP platform security or SAP infrastructure security, mainly the SAP NetWeaver Foundation with all of its features and some operating system and database specific sidesteps. Other parts of SAP security such as GRC or authorizations will not be discussed during this webinar. First, we'd like to zoom in a bit on why we see that SAP security is still a blind spot for many customers. Subsequently, we'll show you how SAP security processes can be automated based on some various demos that we will show. And to conclude, we'll share some best practices based on some customer experiences that we gained over the last years. If my timing is not too bad, there's also enough time for Q&A at the end. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free and put them in the Q&A. We'll work on them afterwards. Excuse me. For those involved in SAP security on a daily basis, they probably recognize this, and that's why it's difficult for SAP systems to keep up. SAP security is still a blind spot. The complexity and the information overload are major obstacles to keep SAP security on an acceptable level. Let's zoom in on that specific topic a bit more. There are actually quite a couple of reasons why this is still the case. If we look in more details, we see that it often simply starts with insufficient awareness, or even worse, with false assumptions. One example of that, and we see that quite often, is that customers wrongly assume that SAP security is somehow magically covered by default. Often customers think that because SAP is expensive and it's built in Germany, that it comes secure by default. And well, even though SAP definitely has quality procedures in place when developing software, still it's made by humans. And for many, many years, also SAP software was shipped in an insecure state by default. So many customers have a big backlog there. New SAP systems that you install now, they are more secure by default, even though not completely secure. But what we see is that many customers have their SAP systems already for years and years. So that's why they are still having that backlog that really needs attention and fixing. Another false assumption that we see is that the responsibility of SAP security lies entirely with the managed service provider, or in case of outsourcing scenarios, at the external party. And that's definitely a wrong assumption, because unfortunately this is never the case. The owner of the data is responsible and has to take care of their own security. The responsibility of that can definitely not be outsourced. In terms of responsibility, we see also that SAP security is often not clearly assigned to someone or a specific department. Often there are teams that focus on the general applications, but SAP sometimes, or even really often, falls in between. And that means that security is not picked up at all for SAP systems. When it comes to the people that can help you with this, again there, often you're relying on the SAP basis team, as they are the technical people responsible for maintaining the systems. But the ones that are really expert in SAP platform security are hard to find. Even though there are many SAP security consultants, it doesn't mean that they can help you with the SAP platform, because the name is a bit misleading. Well, they focus on security, but typically security consultants focus on authorizations and SOD, and not on the platform security of your SAP system. As we have already mentioned, the complexity and the big jungle of information there is out there are a result of which companies are highly dependent on expensive specialists and heavy projects. Furthermore, SAP systems by its nature are complex, with its own architectural, its own specific protocols, and its own language. Think, for example, about ABAP, but also in the network stack, think about specific network protocols. It's all SAP specific. So let's say it's not your typical Microsoft application to manage. Then there's also the enormous amount of items to be checked in the SAP systems itself. Just looking at security relevant SAP parameters that can easily keep you occupied for weeks. And that's just one small sub area of things to check. And I think most of you will recognize this. We are working on this specific topic for 15 years now. And what we see out there is that basically only the really large organizations work on SAP security quite actively, and they have budgets. But most of the other, let's say 80 to 90% of SAP customers, they still need to come from far. They struggle with this topic, and it's barely or not at all addressed. No matter the size of your organization, of your SAP landscape, almost always these SAP systems are business critical and really important to take security more seriously. If we go to some key vulnerabilities, we want to show you some examples based, for example, on the SAP security assessments that we did over the past 10 to 15 years. And we listed some of the frequently found SAP securities here with a high risk. Obviously, this list is far from complete, but just to give you some examples of what we quite often encounter. And one of those is, for example, the low-hanging fruit, like default accounts, even though you would figure out that by now everybody knows that this is really not a good idea, because this is the first thing that malicious actors will try. But due to, for example, SAP star reset to the default password pass, when you do a client copy, it's still there. Also, in the area of RFC gateway security, that's an infrastructure component that allows SAP systems to communicate with each other. There we also see quite some issues, and that ranges from missing access control lists to the activation of the simulation mode, for example. And there's more, but even those two issues that I just mentioned give full administrative access to an SAP system. Similar issues are there with the message server ACL, the access control list of the message server that SAP has been delivering in an insecure default, as mentioned before. Yeah, and that gives SAP customers a big issue, because it allows basically everything in the network without authentication to pose as a rogue SAP application server, again giving full access to the SAP server. And what makes it worse is that last year a public exploit was released on the internet, making this a misconfiguration to definitely take seriously if you had not done that before. But we still find this a lot at customers. Also, something seen a lot at SAP customers is that they tend to patch quite slow, because it takes downtime and it involves testing. So customers are often reluctant to apply patches, leading to a lot of unpatched vulnerabilities in SAP systems and a large backlog of security nodes. Last but not least, in the area of password management, many configurations are not set to a strong default value. For example, all backward compatible hashes are left in the systems. These can be brute forced easily within minutes with free tooling from the internet. All these issues, if not properly secured, can lead to a full compromise of your SAP system. Also good to know that all the issues that we just mentioned here can be automatically detected by Protect4S. Fortunately, there are ways to automate many of these processes to secure your SAP landscape and to simplify the analysis efforts. And the result should always be that your SAP systems are better hardened, of course. Let's find out some more about that automation part. Before we go to some demos, it's important to know that some typical manual SAP platform security processes can be automated. I'd like to show you a bit more about that again, before we go to the demos. In order to see where we can automate things, we have broken down some important processes that are involved in securing general IT landscapes, but more specifically SAP landscapes. Let's have a look at some of them and see what questions they try to answer. The first one is vulnerability management. That's a quite important process in securing your SAP landscape. This process needs to be in place to make sure basically that vulnerabilities in all your SAP components are mapped and risk and vulnerabilities are identified in an early stage to make sure that they are not being exploited. Sounds logical, but it's easier said than done, as in an SAP landscape, many components are involved. And that's not just your SAP application layer with the software components that it contains, but you can also think, for example, about the operating system, the database it's running on, but also all the settings inside that SAP application layer. And where normal vulnerability management software exists, it quite often does not take SAP into account because it doesn't speak Japanese, so to say. And there's configuration management. That's a more general IT process, not specifically related to security, but also that must be in place to make sure that your SAP landscape is configured consistently and also in a secure way. And what we typically see at SAP customers is that even though they sometimes have a security baseline, if they have it, that quite often it's not enforced consistently throughout the landscape. For example, parameters change over systems, dev systems, production systems are not alike, or we see that, for example, the technical systems are left out, or the non-business systems. Think like, for example, about the SAP Solution Manager. This is often one of those systems that are left out or just forgotten. Then there's patch management. It basically addresses patching all components. It is a sub-process of vulnerability management, actually. And in the sense of SAP systems, you can think of SAP security nodes. And they are released on a monthly basis, just like Microsoft does on Patch Tuesday. And they should be analyzed each month. But also take into account the patching of operating system, database, and other components in your SAP landscape, like, for example, a web dispatcher or the SAP router. Then there's patch management, also one of the smaller processes, but within an SAP landscape still quite important, as often high-risk vulnerabilities exist in this area that can easily lead to a compromised system. Again, think, for example, about the backwards compatible password hashes that still many customers have in their SAP systems. And those can be brute forced easily with free open source password tooling like John the Ripper or Hashcat. And most of these processes are typically done, the ones that I just mentioned, in SAP systems nowadays. For example, vulnerability management, configuration management, patch management, they're quite time consuming and also labor intensive. And it can take up to several FTE in mid-size or large SAP landscapes if they are done correctly. Parts of configuration management and vulnerability management can, for example, be done via the solution manager with functionality like configuration validation. But we actually see little use of that in real life because that's difficult to set up. It's quite expensive as you need external consultants often to set it up. So again, So SAP does not really offer you a lot in that area. So before we skip to the demos, one last slide. As I mentioned, the aforementioned processes, they can be automated completely or for the bigger part with Protect4S. And we believe that SAP security is not, it's not a state, it's not static, but in our view, it's more a continuous process that you should keep improving. Yeah, security in general, but also SAP security is a moving target. It changes all the time. New patches are released, new vulnerabilities are discovered. And therefore, actually, one of the design principles that we had in mind when developing Protect4S was to enable this continuous improvement of SAP security. How we do that? In that continuous cycle that we see, we distinguish 3 phases of what we see as a repetitive SAP security process, where again, automation plays a big role, with the goal to step-by-step improve SAP security, because that should be the end goal. A first step there is to start to scan your SAP systems. This can be done on a regular interval, and as often as you like. That can be once, for example, every quarter to, for example, prepare for internal or external audits. But you can also do this on a weekly basis, for example, or even more regular to execute specific compliance-related controls if you have those obligations. And if desired, you can receive automatically generated alerts as a notification that the scan is ready. Then there's a second step, the analysis. There you can make use of automatically generated reports of with all the details of one specific system or for the complete SAP landscape. And also good to mention here is that customers that do operate a SOC, a secure operation center, they can have also the findings automatically being forwarded to a SIEM solution of choice. Also, we have an automatically generated connection overview, and that can be used to analyze, for example, the risk in RFC connections throughout your entire SAP landscape. And we'll show that in a few minutes in the demos. In the third step, the remediation/mitigation of findings, there automation also plays a role, as you can use, for example, an automatically generated mitigation plan to more efficiently lower the risk. And another option is to use the automated SAP Security Notes functionality that can help you apply SAP Security patches automatically that would otherwise be a complete manual activity. And this is actually a unique feature. There is no other vendor in the world that can offer this, and it can save you up to 75% of otherwise manual activities. And these 3 steps combined, they need to be iterated over and over again to keep improving your SAP security, as it is business critical, as mentioned before. Now, to better understand what we talk about, we'd like to show you some practical demonstrations of where automation comes into play. And again, this is not all the functionality there is in Protect4S. Due to the 1 hour time constraint, we had to make some choices, but we'll try to better make clear what the software does and where it can help you. In this first demo, and there's 4 demos, in this first demo we'd like to show you how you can periodically scan your SAP systems in a fully automated way, and how reports are automatically generated after each scan. As mentioned before, it's quite hard as an SAP customer to get a good insight in, let's say, the cybersecurity specific risks in your SAP landscape. And for that purpose, we have developed Protect4S, as it helps you to scan your SAP systems automatically for over 1,500 different issues. To demonstrate it, let's have a look at how that's done. By the way, it's good to mention that the setup of Protect4S is really easy. Already within a few hours, you can have the software installed and run your first scans. What it takes basically is the typical installation of an add-on via Saint, and then the one-time creation of some system connections, and then you're good to go. In this demo, we will assume that the setup is already done and go directly to the scheduling of projects. So let's see if we go to the project configuration in Protect4S and edit an existing project that's already there. And for this demo purpose, there's only one scan in this project, but typically here you would define scans for all the systems in your landscape. If we go to the details of the scan, we can see that that is basically a set of checks that you run against the system. The system will check or will scan again against is defined here. There's also an option to use a check template that can be predefined one or one that you define yourself with your own specific baseline. And then in the next screen, you will see a list of all the checks applicable to this unique system. And in this case, it's a SAP HANA database system running on a SUSE Linux. So you will only see checks that are applicable for those databases and operating systems. You will not see, for example, Windows checks here because it just doesn't make sense. And also you can change the default values of a lot of checks here if you want. In this example, we'll just select all and go to the scheduler. And the scheduler is just like the basic job scheduler in SAP. You can immediately start a scan, or you can schedule it periodically every minute, hour, day, week, month, or start it on a specific start date. For now, we'll just save it and run it just once. The duration of a scan depends on the number of checks and the size of the system, and it ranges somewhere between a few seconds and a few minutes for really large systems. Every scan will generate an automatically detailed report that we will show now. If we go there, as you can see, it's completed almost. And this is a small system. It will be finished really fast. There's many options, but let's zoom on some specific elements. If we start the detailed report, then you're presented with an overview of all the checks executed on the left. And on the right, some heat maps that can help you pick some quick wins or zoom in on operating system or database specific findings. Also, you can click through by just clicking on the cells here. But I think for now, it's more important to see the whole list of findings, and that can be done via the check overview. There's a check overview button, and it will bring you to all the checks that are done. You can change it also if you want to see all the past ones. But in general, most customers just want to see the failed ones. And by default, they are sorted by risk, which is defined by the impact multiplied by the likelihood of exploitation. And if we zoom in on an example here, for example, the message server ACL that we mentioned before, it's not restricted enough. It simply has a star in there. If you go to the check information button, you can even find more information about it. In this case, it's a very high finding. And here you can see for every finding vulnerability, the solution there is, but also links to references. And customers appreciate that because it's sometimes really hard to find the specific, let's say, documentation for a specific finding. This is a vulnerability detail report. We also have an overview for the whole landscape, but we'll not take that into account in this demo because of time purposes. One last report we'd like to show you is the Mitigation Report. And that can also be generated automatically based on the scan of a system. And this report contains all field items of choice. You can, if we create a mitigation plan, we'll do so here. Here you can select in the selection screen what you want to have in there. And for example, in this case, let's zoom in only on high and very high risk findings, because that's typically what customers tend to focus on first. And if we then create this plan for just the high and very high findings, it will generate an Excel list. We will open it here for you to see what it looks like. And depending on the filters, it contains more or less information, but what it does in this case, it groups all the findings into specific groups. So you can quite easily pick up those items. For example, we can have a look at, for example, all the parameters that need to be changed. If we scroll down a bit, here you can see change SAP profile parameter. There is a list of findings that are grouped. There's a lot of other information there, for example, about the team that you can assign it to, or again, all the links to the documentation. But what we get as feedback from customers is that it helps them in remediation and mitigation efforts. And also it's quite easy to enrich this Excel sheet with your own additional data if you'd like. So far for the automation of scanning and the mitigation report, the next demo we'd like to show you is about the SIEM integration. In the previous demo, we saw how easy it is to scan SAP systems and to generate detailed reports. But another way to, let's say, analyze the output is to have the findings from Protect4S being forwarded to a SIEM solution. It's not that common yet for all organizations to have SIEM solutions or a secure operations center. But we see it more and more, especially over the past few years. Customers are more adopting it. It is a trend, and it makes sense because what they typically want to do is to gather together all the security relevant information at the central place in an organization. And this is where SIEM solutions can help you. And that's why from the Protect4S view, we offer ways to also have the SAP security specific data unlocked to SIEM solutions. So you can also integrate your SAP security data in this secure operations center, or at least in a central place. What does that look like? So basically, to enable it only takes a few clicks. There's the application settings in general. Let me show you how that looks like. So if we go to the application settings, you can there activate this by choosing a format, directory where the findings are written to and where the SIEM solution can pick it up. And if you want, you can specify a file prefix. So the SIEM solution can better know from which system, for example, the data is coming. Then, and that's the last step, in the projects that you defined, also there you have to set the flag that you want to export it to the SIEM solution. Here you can also choose if you want to only forward notifications from a specific severity, only high and very high, for example, because sometimes customers just don't want to see the low risk issues there. Now, with this being set up, all that's needed to be done is for the SIEM solution to retrieve the findings and index them. We will now switch to Splunk, for example, as that is a SIEM solution that we used internally. And from here on, customers can now really correlate the data with other security data, build their own reporting on top, or, for example, set actions on specific findings. And as you can see, all the information is at your fingertips. From here, you can search through it. And every finding that is sent from Protect4S to a SIEM solution is really forwarded with all the metadata there is. So the severity, the CVE, the message details, And again, this can all be picked up and processed now centrally and correlated with, for example, other security data in your secure operations center. So far, the scene integration. Let's continue to our next demo. And that is, again, as I mentioned, the automatic implementation of SAP Security Notes. And in order to do so, let me show you, we need to run a new scan, as this is the input that we need to be able to apply the missing SAP Security Notes. So in this demo, let's run just a normal regular scan as usual. Or you can also take, if you want, an existing scan that you already ran before and take that as input. As you can see, just as a side step, already when scheduling a scan, there is a group, subgroup, or a sub area for the SAP Security Notes. In this case, let's just select all the checks here, but if you want, you can also scan only for security nodes, but it doesn't really matter, as you can filter them out later. So let's just do a run immediately. So there we go. If we go to the check overview of the details of this scan, and we go to another display type, you can set it to group subgroup. Then you can see that there are 105 ABAP security nodes missing in the system. All the details are here below. So for this demo purpose, what you can do now, if you go to the menu mitigation, you can click on mitigation of SAP security nodes, and that will open up a new wizard. By the way, all the configuration is done by wizards, so it's quite straightforward. And again, if we follow the wizard, here again you see those 105 missing SAP security nodes. You can sort them by risk. Well, for the demonstration purposes here, let's just select a few, only for example the high and the very high ones. And then go to the next screen. There is an optional field for a transport request there. If you use charm, for example, you can select there your charm transport. If you leave it blank, no problem, the system will then create its own transport request. Then there is a pop-up with an optional disclaimer. Basically, then it's running. And this is a process that you can leave running. It will try and just implement the SAP security nodes. And you can, for example, just continue your regular work now and only monitor this process. It typically runs for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe even longer, depending on the amount of nodes. And in this case, we have just fast forwarded things a bit. And if we go to the output that we can see here, then we'll see the result. So only one, in this example, one node failed. You have some statistics, and if we go to the SAP nodes overview, you can see the details, and typically the ones with a red traffic light are the SAP security nodes that have manual steps in them, and that cannot really be automated. So that still needs to be done manually, but again, this feature definitely can save you a lot of work, especially, for example, if you have a backlog to catch up with hundreds of nodes, as we saw in the example. So far for the demo of the SAP security nodes, let's go to the next demo, and that is a final demo about the functionality mentioned earlier, and that is an automated system connection map. This is a lab preview of a new functionality that we recently developed. It is not officially shipped yet. We expect that to be done on a quite short term. This functionality is basically showing you the connections there are between SAP systems. Because one of the challenges around SAP security is the interconnectivity of SAP systems. This poses quite a big risk because if malicious actors can take over one system in your landscape, it often means that they can use RFC hopping or other ways to take over the rest of the SAP landscape. And this is actually a risk that we see at many customers. As for example, typically what they do is they put SAP all privileged users in those connections. And a big misunderstanding here is that they think that it can only be abused when dialog users are in there, but that's not the case. This can also be abused with, for example, system users. And what SAP advises is to make sure that you don't create connections from systems of a lower security zone to systems in a higher security zone. The other way around is just fine. And since typically SAP systems are tightly interwoven, mapping out where you run risk is a really time-consuming and boring thing to do. But with the help of Protect4S, this goes quite easy. Let me show you. And in this demo, we go to the connection map, then display one that we created recently, and this is what it looks like. Now in this graphic, you see SAP systems of your SAP landscape mapped out with HTTP, RFC, SOAP, TCP, IP, and database connections. And the good thing is it's highly customizable. It contains a lot of information. We maximized it a bit for better visibility. And then if you go to the display settings, you can see that there's a lot to change. And you can save that as a default setting in the way that you want. By default, as you can see, the connections show the user that's inside those connections. But you can also change this, for example, to the connection name or other metadata if you like. Here you see we'll change it to the connection name. And it looks a bit messy now, but you can all customize and change that. If we then click on a specific connection, in this case the one from DE2 to GSM, then you can see all the details there. For example, the client, the source and the target system details, but also the user in there and the roles that it has. And as you can see, it has profile SAP all, typically seen at customers. And that is a big risk because it means if you can compromise DE2, you can quickly jump to the other system. Yeah, apart from a graphical display, you can also go to a list display and view all the details of the systems and the connections. Again, it's basically the same data, but then in a list view. And also that can be exported. If you want to have that in Excel, enrich it, do whatever with it as you like, you can all do that. And what we believe is that this connection map is definitely a great addition to Protect4S, as it really helps customers to make it more easy to mitigate risk in the area of connections. So keep looking out for that. We'll ship it in the near future. So far for the demos. Let's go to a few last items before we go to the Q&A. Some key takeaways. And I cannot stress that enough. Basically, everything starts with being aware of the risks, knowing where your starting position is. Commitment, also important, really important, commitment from management and a budget to work on these things, because remediation and mitigation takes time, means money. We often hear from SAP customers that they leave also the SAP Security to their hosting or cloud party. And again, as a key takeaway, I want to stress again that while someone is maintaining your SAP systems, doesn't mean per se that they are responsible for the security of it. And what we also often see that sometimes there is someone responsible for IT security in general, but no one really responsible for SAP security. And we find that quite strange because most customers invested a lot of money and time in SAP systems, and it's often business critical. And the business is just simply depending on the data. So it should get more attention. At customers where SAP security is already properly organized, what we see there is that also there someone is really responsible for that. And that's often someone, for example, like an SAP security officer, who is responsible for the security of SAP system, coordinates the technical activities. Secondly, we see that SAP platform security without automated solutions is simply impossible. It's not doable anymore. It's too complex, too heavy, and many SAP customers don't have the resource to do that. Also, the solutions that we see that SAP offers, if any, or the solutions of other vendors are really too expensive or too complex for most SAP running organizations. Also, what we see at large multinationals is that they do, for example, large-scale SAP security projects under pressure of audits. Instead of trying to let's say, prevent and eliminate vulnerabilities on a structural basis. We are asked a lot also to do SAP, let's say, annual assessments. But fortunately, the customers that we went, we often are able to convince them that it's better to go for a structural solution. A good example to mention there, for example, is the Rabobank, one of the top 3 banks in the Netherlands, that has gone from a more reactive to a more preventive way in terms of SAP security, thanks to Protect4S. Okay, so far sending information from my side. Let's see and go to the Q&A if we have some questions to answer. I do see a question, and by the way, if there are still any questions for now, please drop them in the Q&A area. And also, if you have questions later on, I'm quite sure that everybody knows where to reach us. So let me see. There is one question about the licensing. Hi, is the licensing based on SIDs? I guess what is meant there are SAP IDs. No, the licensing of Protect4S is based on the SAP streets that you have. So like a CRM street or an R3 street or a BW street, and you pay a license per street, which includes all the systems in that street. So that can be development, QA, production, but can also be an additional sandbox or pre-production. All the systems of a specific street are included in that license. If you want to know more about that, we are happy to tell you more about that. I see a question if the presentation can be shared via email. Yes, we will make sure that everybody gets the presentation. So don't worry about that. I don't see any other questions for now. I hope that means everything was clear. Again, maybe good to mention that as a last few words, if you want to keep up to date, please follow us on LinkedIn or get in touch with us. And maybe that as a final note is good to mention that we offer a completely free trial for anyone 30 days without any strings attached. So it's just a full version. You can just run it, as we strongly believe that seeing is believing, and so customers know what they buy. With that having said, I think it's time to conclude this webinar. Thank you all for your attention, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you.